If it had a mind, you could reason with it. If it had a face, you could look it in the eye. If it had a body, you could shoot it. Now, man is no longer the supreme being on this planet.
The organism is growing at a geometric rate. By all accounts, it's at least 1,000 times its original mass.
Nobody believes me about what happened tonight.
What did happen?
I want that organism alive.
I think you pissed it off.
The Blob. Terror has no shape.
Hey guys, this is Mario again, and Happy Halloween! Evil laughter. Today is the final entry in Monster Fest 2011. Ooh. And I decided today to end it with one of my favorite horror films from the 80s, and it's also one of the films that I say is a film that people who make remakes nowadays should look at. Along with The Fly, this is a film that you should look at when you decide to do a remake. It is directed by, of course, Chuck Russell, who you remember directed Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, and after this went on to direct The Mask. And it stars Kevin Dillon, Shawnee Smith, who has fame nowadays for her roles in the Saw films, Donovan Leitch, Jeffrey Duman, Candy Clark, Joe Seneca, and Del Close, among others. It is, of course, the 1988 remake of the 50s classic, The Blob. Now, if you remember in my last video, I mentioned that this was the first of the 3 films I saw. Then and now, it is my favorite entry in the series, but when this movie first came out, people who were fans of the original hated it, which I think is kind of close-minded in them. I think it was probably because most of the comedic tone is lost. Like, there's some comedy in here, but it's dark comedy, like the Blob using the yo-yo and stuff like that. And also the scene where it's the movie within the movie where they're making fun of the slasher genre. A little bit late to be trimming the hedges. Maybe he's a peeping Tom. Well, let's give him a show. Wait a minute, hockey season ended months ago! Stuff like that. The fans of the original film are the people that mostly hated it. And like I said, it's probably because the comedic tone's lost. Also, the effects are better, which is part of the reason why it was remade. But for me, that just seems close-minded if you're going to hate it just because it has a non-comedic tone. Because like I said, I prefer this film over the other two. Because like I said, I respect the first one. The second one is abysmal. And this one, it's a very good step in the right direction. The acting, I feel, is better in this one. It's Kevin Dillon, Shawnee Smith, all the others. They do excellent performances. Chuck Russell, he gives us excellent direction. And this shows, along with Nightmare 3, how and why he is a good director. And I really wish he did more horror because of the 4 films afterward, The Mask is a comedy, even though the comic was kind of like comedic horror. If I remember right. Eraser, that is an action movie. Not really much horror. Blessed Child, I've never really heard of this one, let me check. That's a supernatural thriller, so there he probably goes a little bit more back to that direction. And then of course the last movie he directed was The Scorpion King, which, even though it's a spin-off of a remake in its sequel that was a remake of a horror movie, it's more of an action movie. Okay, and Chuck also helped with the screenplay, which you can actually kind of tell a little bit, along with the other guy, Frank Darabont. So I'm going to see what else this guy's written real quick. Let's see. Oh, he was also the writer for Dream Warriors. That's cool. He was also the writer for The Fly 2. Let's see. He was involved with the Shawshank Redemption. No, he directed and wrote that one. So it shows he could do good direction too. And I believe he also directed The Green Mile. It says he's connected to that. He also directed The Mist, which I have to watch in its entirety. But from what I understand, the only thing that's really different from the short story is like minor stuff. And then of course, he directed the pilot for that TV series on AMC, The Walking Dead, which I've yet to see all of that show, but I've seen like bits and pieces of it, like the episode where the racist gets tied up on the roof. The thing about it shocked me is they actually said the N-word on TV. I was like, they actually said it? I'll be damned. Now I know I'm getting off topic, but... Now, the plot of this movie, when you boil down to it, to the basics, it's the same as the first movie, you know, it takes place in a small town. This meteorite falls from the sky and it's found by a bum. He takes the thing out. It gets attached to his hand. He ends up having to be taken to the hospital. The blob eats him. Then it gets loose and then starts going through town. And our heroes are two teenagers. That's when you get to the vagueness. It's the same. It's when you start to get the specifics that it is way different. Now, one thing, of course, so this is a minor one though, is that whereas the original takes place in Pennsylvania, this one it never stayed, but I believe it's supposed to take place in Colorado, like in a skiing town. And they mention, of course, that it hasn't snowed that much in the past couple of years, which you're thinking, oh, with the blob, they are royally screwed, if that's true. Which they kind of are. And you can tell from the talk that they really need it to snow this year, or else the town's going to go under. And another thing I like is that it does not go down the way you think it's going to go down. Who you think is going to be the main hero is not the main hero. I mean, in the original, we had Steve McQueen, and it's kind of hinted he's either a jock, or he's friends with a couple other jocks. In this movie, it fakes us out, making us think that a jock is going to be the main hero. But then, of course, if you pay attention from the beginning, you can tell he's probably not going to be the main hero. It might be this other guy, but they're kind of like, who's going to be the hero? Who's going to be a villain or something? But the jock, not the hero. He's killed like, I don't know, not even 20 minutes into the movie, which I think was good because most of the time in movies like this, it usually is a jock who ends up being the hero. But I like that it's Kevin Dillon's character, Brian Flagg, and yes, that is the last name Flagg is spelled just like like it is in Randall Flagg, 2 F's, not 2 F's, 2 G's, excuse me. Learn how to spell. Missaid a letter, but 2 G's. That's Flagg. You can tell he's kind of like a reluctant hero. He's kind of like, he kind of acts a little bit like, you know, a James Dean like character, you know, a rebel without a cause, but you can tell he has like a heart of gold. It's just that, as he puts it later in the movie, no one ever gave a damn about him, and no one ever volunteered to take care of him, because it mentions that his mother basically is neglectful, and that he's taking care of himself a lot. So you could tell that he doesn't really warm up to people much. And as the movie goes along, when he has to save the day, you can even see something's like, why am I doing this? You could tell by the way expressions on his face and some of the stuff he says aloud to himself that not something he would normally do, but the girl's starting to warm up to him. Now, Shawnee Smith, she does an excellent job as Megan. And I have to say, this is probably my favorite role I've seen her in. Let's see what else she's done besides this in the Saw films real quick. No, she was half of that one desert country rock duo thing. Let's see, feature film. Here we go, filmography. Oh, she was in Iron Eagle. Oh, she's in Who's Harry Crumb, Leaving Las Vegas as a biker girl. Oh, she was in Armageddon in a small role. Ooh. She saw. She was in that movie The Island, Repo the Genetic Opera, the unreleased short film. Oh, she was in the Grudge 3. I got that movie somewhere. Maybe I'll review that one time. Then she was also in some TV stuff, like an episode of Murder, She Wrote, Cagney and Lacey. Oh, she was in an episode of The X-Files from 1994. Oh, this is interesting. I did not know this. She was a waitress in the Shining miniseries. Huh. When I give that a rewatch, I'm gonna have to spot that because it just says waitress, so it could be like she could be like one of the ghosts in the background. I don't know. Oh, she guest starred recently in an episode of Law & Order L.A. Cool. No, more like Arnold. Cool. Now, oh yeah, before I go too far, Shawnee Smith's character. Now, in the first movie, the female character doesn't really do much. She's basically just there to help Steve and not really do much else. She doesn't really do anything exciting, but here, I guess you could say her character is kind of She starts a little bit like that, but as the film progresses, she starts to come into her own. And by the end, she kind of has a moment that's her equivalent of Ripley's "Get Away From Her, You Bitch," and Laurie Strode's Michael moment with the axe. So she gets the machine gun, starts shooting at the Blob, doesn't do anything, but it's basically that's her moment of the film where she comes into her own. Now the adult actors, they do a good job. Like Del Close plays the priest or reverend or whatever he is. And at first you can tell he's kind of nice, but as the film goes on, he starts to get really into his religion. He starts to right when the Blob starts to go apeshit, he's like, this all has been prophesized. And then by the very end of the movie in the sequel bait thing, which yeah, it does have sequel bait like the other two. Not as blatant as the previous film, but more so than the original. He's basically like doing that whole rapture thing. Brothers and sisters, who will be lifted up? None but the faithful. All that. And he does a good job with it. The guy who plays the drugstore owner, who is Meg's dad, by the way, he does a pretty good job. And he says one of my favorite lines in the movie. That boy doesn't need condoms. He needs a muzzle. And with him, they actually do a little play on that urban legend, the guy buying condoms for his date. The guy congratulates him, and then he goes to meet his date, and he finds out that the father is the one that owns the drugstore. It's done in a funny way, because they turn it around, because this guy's buying condoms, the Reverend walks in, he sees what he's buying, he says, I'm buying them for my friend. Why doesn't he buy them? He's a little shy. Then the guy says something like, man, I can't let this girl waiting, and it leads into that muzzle line. They go home, the dad, drugstore guy, he has his paper up, then he lowers it, and he sees who it is, he's like, you could tell that he knows what's happening. Then they mention that something bad happened after that, but they don't say what. So I just love that scene. The effects for the Blob. This is probably one of the reasons it was remade. The effects, they're way better obviously than the original. Although, like I mentioned, the original and its sequel, for the time period, they are decent effects, but the effects here blow them way out of the water. Like, I mean, at the end it might be red silicone as well, but the Blob is mostly puppetry. Maybe there's like some green screen stuff, like when they have to put a giant one in with the actors, but it's mostly puppetry, practical effect. Nowadays it would have been an entirely CGI Blob, which would have killed it for me, but I do like the effects. And there's one touch that I notice watching it, is that since the Blob in this one's not just supposed to be some goo, it's supposed to be some living organism. They actually added a little touch of like putting like something that looks like blue veins running through it, which I think that's a nice touch. Actually gives it more of a sense of being alive than in the previous ones where it's just basically a big goo thing that moves. Here it's actually, you get the feeling it's a living organism. And another difference, this might have been what made the people who were fans of the original like it. Whereas the original, we don't get an answer to where the Blob comes from. Here we do. It's basically a government experiment that they were practicing in biological warfare, you know, to get ahead of the Russians. It's kind of that whole Cold War vibe, which I feel works for the film. It works for its 80s setting, even though it's 2 years before the Cold War ended, but it still works. And it went awry, and it hints at the Blob as it mutated. That's what threw the satellite that it was in out of orbit. And to go along with this, the main scientist guy, who is played, I'm gonna look to see what actor it is, because I remember it's Christopher Meadows is that character's name, but he's played by actor Joe Senisa. He does a great job. I mean, he's lovable at first, but then as it goes along, you really hate the guy's guts. And his whole speech about how they have to, it's not just people, it's nations that are at work, and those people are expendable. He really sells the thing about government not caring for those people when it comes to affairs of with other governments. It's nation first, people second, which it should be people first, nation second. Now, just to let you know, he does die, but it's the one time in a horror movie where you probably don't care when the black guy dies, because he's not comic relief, but he's a villain. Now, the other black guy in the movie does live. He's basically Flag's friend / occasional boss. And him, he does say some stuff about the snow, so we find out about that. And then, of course, at the end, you just gotta have faith. I'm not gonna spoil the context of that line, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Him, he's a likable character. He's not there for comic relief, like in a lot of horror movies. He doesn't die stupidly. He's just there. Now, other characters. Oh, another thing is this movie actually has the balls to kill off a little kid. I mean, how many other horror movies can you think of that kill off little kids? Not that many that are coming to mind. I mean, sure, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason breaks through the cabin and scares the bejesus out of the little kids, but it's basically like, little kids, ah! But he doesn't kill any of them. Jason doesn't really kill little kids. Freddy, he kills a little kid off camera in Freddy vs. Jason, but it's a flashback and you don't see it. Michael doesn't really kill any little kids. He attempts to when his niece is a kid, but he doesn't really kill anyone else. He lets Tommy and the other girl go, basically. He's knocked out, but he still lets them go. Scream, teenagers. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, adults or teenagers. Although Leatherface was originally supposed to kill Jeremiah in the remake, which I wonder why that's not in the deleted scenes section. Especially considering Jeremiah is not in the prequel, but hey, neither are those other people. None of the other ones are coming to mind, but his death scene is very graphic, I guess you could put it. Not graphic as in you see blood everywhere, but he's pulled into the water, then he comes back up, you see him disintegrating and stuff. So it's kind of graphic, and granted they're in a sewer, so it's not in the best lighting, but it works. And that's one other thing, I like the lighting in this movie. The scenes are lit just the right way so you can actually see what's going on, but it works to it. Like when we first see the Blob, it's in a brightly lit room, and you see the door slowly push back, and you see it slowly going up behind the door and stuff, and it works. And also, one thing, I don't know if there's any precedent for this in the other two films that I didn't notice, but the Blob, it kind of, even just touching it start to melt you. I mean, you get that when Megan gets her hair cut by the Blob a little bit, you can see like smoke coming from it, like it's melting the part of the hair it's touching, which I thought was a nice little touch, meaning even touching it is corrosive. That's dangerous. And also, it's just cold itself, not just CO2 they specify in this film. And also, another thing I want to point out is that one of the deputies, Deputy Biggs, he's played by Paul McCrane, which that name may sound familiar to some of you because that's the guy who played Emil in RoboCop. So he goes from 1 year playing a villain in a movie to the next year playing a good guy, because the deputy technically is a good guy, even though he's the ass cop. We want to see two cops. One's a good cop, one's a bad cop, and they actually do kind of play that when they're interrogating Flag at one point. Good cop, bad cop, which that's one scene I like, is when Flag's being interrogated by the cops. You can really tell that the cops really know him, and you could buy that they're local people and they know each other from years of interaction. It's a very good scene. That's one thing I love about this movie, is that the interactions between the characters, you really buy the fact that they're a small town community. Nowadays, that'd probably be harder to do with the actors in Hollywood. Maybe not so from the adults, but from the kids, especially if it were the Twilight actors. Now, overall, like I said, this is one of the best remakes made, in my opinion. I mean, it has some love and respect for the original, but it basically becomes its own film. Just like The Fly, and if they made more horror remakes, or remakes in general like that, then the remakes would be done better. I mean, the Friday the 13th one did that. It made its own movie, but it showed love and respect for the original films. From what I've heard, the My Bloody Valentine remake sort of did that. The Halloween remake did that to an extent, but not enough to where people are going to say it's one of the best remakes made. The Nightmare on Elm Street remake did not do that. It did the opposite, copying the original movie. That's what you don't want to do. The Thing remake followed the rules, love and respect for the original movie, but make your own movie. I believe The Departed. Yes, The Departed technically is a remake. It's a remake of a Hong Kong film. From what I understand, it did the same thing, because one of the actors from that original film actually likes The Departed, but he says it's not as good. He doesn't think it's as good as the original. Maybe that may be a little bit biased, but probably because they combined two characters or something. I don't know the specifics of it, but like I said, remake that Hollywood should watch, along with The Thing and The Fly. Those are three remakes. If you're gonna do a remake, you should show your crew that and say, this is what I want to do. Stylistically, no. Love and affection for the original movie, but its own movie. Oh yeah, before I end the review, how could I forget that score from the end of by Alien Brave New Love? That is such a great way to end the movie. And like I said earlier, it does have a sequel bait ending, but it doesn't it's not as subtle as the first, but not as blatant as the second. it's somewhere in between. Like, you could imagine, you could actually cut that out and it wouldn't hurt the movie, but for what it is, you could just imagine that maybe the Reverend dies before he can do anything, or maybe someone kills the Blob after he dies or prevents him from doing it. It's left to your imagination, which that's actually kind of nice. I wish they had made a sequel. Like, they could still make a sequel, but it might end up being shit. If they did do a sequel, maybe like have Meg and Brian having got together, which by the end of the movie I could see them both getting together. I mean, he came back for her after all. I could see them hooking up easily. Have them get together. Maybe they have a couple kids. They're coming back to moving back to the town or something. And somehow the Blob gets free again. Like, maybe that Reverend's passing through. He has an accident. He gets killed in it. The Blob breaks out of the thing and gets through. And then I can imagine for Brian, oh no, not this again. But knowing Hollywood, they might just do what they did in Lost Boys of Tribe, have them killed off and then just have their kids show up, which that would really piss me off if they did that. Now, my rating for the Blob remake is a 5 out of 5, because I personally can't think of anything wrong with the movie. I mean, like I said, it's its own movie, but it has love and respect for the original film, and it actually has at least one homage to the sequel, which is the sink scene. Like, if you've seen both Beware the Blob and this movie, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that concludes Monster Fest 2011. I hope you enjoyed it.